Thank you for joining us. Today is November 13th, 2023, Monday. We are here in the Commissioners' Conference Room at our Larimer County Administrative Services Building on Oak Street in Fort Collins. We are here for a work session with our Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Department. And I am Larimer County Commissioner Jody Sharp McNally, Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. Joining me today at our conference table is my colleague, Commissioner John Kafalis, and my other colleague, Commissioner Kristen Stevens. Also at our table is our County Manager, Lorenda Volker, and leading the discussion, because a lot of other people are against the wall, so I'm assuming they're not going to come to the table unless they have to, is our Community Development Director, Rebecca Everett. So Rebecca, there's Director Ellis. And our CPERS Director, Community Planning, Infrastructure, and Resources Director, Leslie Ellis, is also in the room. I see that Rebecca's at the table, so Rebecca, I will turn this over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Amy White is unable to join us today. She's our co-compliance supervisor. She is unexpectedly ill, so I will be providing the presentation and representing the co-compliance division. And we have several of our staff from co-compliance and other divisions here as well to provide help with any questions I may not be able to answer. So we're sad to be missing Amy today, but she is either watching now or will be watching this, and we're both looking forward to the conversation and your guidance. So this is a continuing conversation over the last couple months between the Board of County Commissioners and staff related to an assessment that was conducted of the co-compliance division and our procedures and priorities and how we implement and enforce various ordinances that we have on the books for the county. So we had a work session with you all on October 11th. That was followed up with individual one-on-one style meetings with each commissioner to gain your direct feedback on several of the proposed changes or options for consideration. So today we're ready to deliver those results and discuss the areas that we've identified as staff for implementation and get your guidance on those items. We've organized the recommendations in the presentation today based on the potential order of implementation. As a brief reminder, our general philosophy in co-compliance is to take more of a balanced and educational approach, a facilitative approach, rather than an approach that is strictly enforcement focused. We really work to educate and gain cooperation from our property owners and members of our community through the co-compliance process. We intend to take a fair and consistent approach to all cases, as well as firm and timely action on violations and complaints that we receive. So I'll move into our recommendations from here. And I have about 16 more slides, so if you would like to stop for questions along the way, please feel free, or we can kind of get through the full presentation and see what input you have. But we'll go recommendation by recommendation through the slides here. So the first is more of a for your information kind of action. This is an administrative action that we received your guidance on back in October that we are already proceeding with. And that is to modify the number of days that somebody can respond in our notification letters. So right now we send a 15-day letter when there's a violation. If they don't respond back to us with their plan for compliance, we send a 30-day letter, and we're planning to shorten that second letter to 15 days as well to just speed up the process and make it a little more efficient for our staff and for our complainants who are expecting responses. There are no funding implications for this item, and we're working to revise those notices now. Next is the expanded use of legal enforcement tools. So this is the use of stipulated agreements as well as utilizing county court more heavily than we have in the past. We heard general support from the commissioners on moving forward with this item, and we are already testing out some of these mechanisms. We've used county court a little bit more frequently recently, as well as stipulated agreements. We're testing that out, and it has been very effective for us so far. In order to utilize these tools a little more consistently or more heavily in the process, it could impact staff capacity and resources. So there are some potential funding implications related to either reallocating staff resources or additional staffing if we were to more heavily utilize both of these tools. Moving on to addressing illegal businesses. So in this recommendation, we discussed with you all the idea of regulating businesses a little bit more proactively when they're operating out of compliance with land use or building regulations. And what we heard from you all was general support for taking a more proactive approach, as long as we are accounting for a fair and consistent approach, treating all businesses equally, recognizing when there are life safety and environmental concerns, and prioritizing proactive enforcement in those situations where there might be an environmental hazard or a dangerous condition. We'd also be considering whether or not there is a realistic path to compliance for businesses that could get approved within their zone district, and they're not in a floodplain, and there is a viable path forward. We heard from you all to take a more metered approach and allow those businesses to continue operating while they're pursuing compliance. In cases where a business does not have a realistic path to compliance, their zoning doesn't allow it, the opportunity for a rezoning is probably not supported, and the business is operating, for example, in a residential neighborhood without a path toward compliance, we heard from you support for being more firm in enforcement of those cases. Also accounting for level of impact on surrounding properties and whether a particular business is what we would term a repeat offender, whether they've violated codes numerous times or haven't demonstrated responsiveness to past violations, would be another factor in determining whether we take a more proactive approach to compliance. So this would continue to be a case-by-case assessment as we are proposing it based on the feedback we've heard from you, but we would start to be a little bit more proactive, particularly in those situations where there's a major safety issue or no path to compliance. For the illegal businesses in particular, there are no funding implications. Our current staffing levels are adequate to shift our approach on those. But there is a next step, which is to further revise our priority ratings and ensure illegal businesses are accounted for in those ratings in a way that is supported by the commissioners. In terms of time frame, we could immediately start to shift our approach on these businesses, but in order to fully develop our guidelines and obtain approval for new priority ratings, we will want to revisit that with you all, so it may take a couple months to fully close the loop on that. Moving on to the priority ratings themselves. This, as you recall, we talked through the priority ratings for both building and land use code violations. We have A, B, C, and D level violations, and those priority ratings haven't been revised in many, many years. And we have, as staff, started to take a crack at revising those priorities based on where we feel the most value can be gained for our community, and based on the feedback that we've heard from all of you. So we heard general support from the commissioners to revise that B category of priority ratings for both zoning compliance and building compliance. And I'll share a little bit about that on the next couple slides, but briefly, there are no funding implications to shifting priorities. It's just a matter of changing where our resources, our staff time is best directed. And co-compliance, staff, and planning and building have all had input into those revised ratings. So this is still very much a draft, and we would be coming back to you with a more finalized version for your input over the next several months, or in the next several months. But we wanted to show you some of the thought process that we've had so far. So we'll start with building priority ratings and then zoning priority ratings, and I'll just give you a snapshot of some of the shifts that we're planning to make. So under building code, currently, as I mentioned, we have A, B, C, D, and the A category is divided into A1 and A2. We propose splitting the B category into a couple levels as well, into B1 and B2, with different emphasis on both of those, with one item moving up into priority A. So we plan to move that first item that's highlighted, new or moved commercial and residential buildings. So if there's a brand new building, a new house, or a new business, a building that's being constructed without permits, that would be a high priority for us. If it's under construction now and it's not something that's 50 plus years old that's always been out in the community. So that would be a high priority. The B1 category would include building violations that present possible life safety hazards, including adding on new bedrooms or sleeping areas that might present a safety risk, basement finishes that add sleeping areas or bedrooms, anything that changes the building's egress, so changes where the door or front door is located or the path to get to a door is a potential safety issue, or anything that affects the fire-rated construction or structurally changes the building, so something that poses an increased fire risk or a structural risk. That includes installing new windows or doors, or removing windows or doors, attached decks, stairs, handrails that are part of the egress pathway, and any commercial decks where there might be people gathering. So really looking at those potential safety hazards. The B2 category would be, B1 would be more emphasized over B2 in terms of where we spend our time. The B2 violations present less of a chance of safety hazard, but it could include other occupied space within a building. So new additions, a new garage or a new office space that's not a building, things like that. Converting a garage to a habitable space without a bedroom, so converting a garage to a studio or a work space would be a B2. Residential decks that don't affect the egress pathway. Gas appliances that are replaced in the same location. Typically a new gas appliance or a gas appliance that's in a new location could be a potential safety hazard. We want to make sure that the venting is correct and the piping is correct. But when it's replaced in the same location, there's generally less of a risk because those issues presumably should have been worked out when it was first installed. Detached accessory buildings, sheds that didn't have a permit would move down to B2, and so would roof replacements that don't have a permit. So I know that gets a little bit dense. I'll pause to see if there are questions on the priority ratings for building code.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
On the building code and changing the ratings, where would tiny homes fit in? If a tiny home is being built and it's not following the rules, where would that fit on the priority list as far as, I presume that would be in the B category.
Well, Eric Freed, building official. Yeah, I see Rebecca looking my way. A tiny home is a home. It's just really small, so it would be the same priority as any new home being constructed without a building permit. So most of those are actually an A priority. If it has already been done, so it's in place but no permit, I would think it would be a B1 because there's potential safety hazards. We don't know about the wiring or the venting or structural stability or stuff.
Thank you.
So I had a quick question. So I look at roof replacement without a permit. How does that look like in areas with, like last year, Wellington had just massive hailstorm and damage, and about, as I drove through one of those neighborhoods, it seemed like every roof was getting replaced. When we have a situation like that, how quick of a turnaround is it for those homeowners or those businesses if we have a really influx of roof replacements and they get going without, let's say there's a delay or something. So what has, because I'm sure we've had plenty of experience in this area recently. I'm just curious about that. What does that look like?
We haven't had one in the county for a while, but I know Fort Collins has had some too. Depends where the hailstorm hits. So a re-roof permit is a miscellaneous permit. There's no plan review involved. So if the roofer has a contractor's license, it can be issued the next day. So that doesn't hold anything up. Inspections could get backed up if there were hundreds that had to be looked at, but it wouldn't hold up the actual work. But the reality is maybe half the people who replace their roof know they need a permit or get a permit. I mean, a lot of it happens without a permit already. So, and we don't typically go out and chase that, but if our inspectors see someone doing a re-roof and they check, they may stop and ask questions because we want to make sure it's done right.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about the B2 with the residential decks not serving the front door. Does it make a difference if it serves like the back door? And then also, like, what about, like, I guess I worry about stability of those kind of things. Do we have any concerns about that?
Well, the reason we split it up this way is in our building code amendments, if the deck is serving the front door, which is the main exit, or it's over 30 inches high, then we require a permit for it. But if it's not serving the front door and it's not over 30 inches high, then we don't even require a permit for that. We eased it up a couple years ago. So we're trying to find out which decks are the most critical. All commercial decks, because it could have a large number of people on it, and then the residential ones that are part of the exit path. But if you had a small deck off your back door, it's not as critical as the others. We're trying to figure out where to prioritize because we can't do everything.
I guess I was thinking of some of those taller kind of like that serve maybe the second story or something like that. I guess those are more, what do they call those? I don't know.
It's a good point.
Like we have some in my neighborhood that are like second story decks that maybe people come out of their master bedroom onto this deck or something like that. I mean, do you have, I guess I always look at that and think like, oh my gosh, is that, I don't know. Maybe they're fine. But
no, it's worth thinking about. I mean, any guidelines we have are going to be sort of the general guidelines, and then we'll still be looking at things on a case-by-case basis. It may be that it's a deck that's higher off the ground, it's not the exit. Well, in that case, it'll be over 30 inches high anyway.
So it would fall under that.
Yeah.
So that would probably be under B1 if they were building something that was that high that looked
And
unstable.
maybe we want to revise this. This was
I have a
just
fear of
quick
heights, so I'm probably projecting way too much in this space.
So any deck that Commissioner Stevens is standing on should be.
Yeah, like Eric said, there's, even within the priority ratings, the inspectors really do look at every case and really evaluate what is the level of risk associated with it. And if it's pretty clear that there's a tall deck that's structurally questionable, that would elevate in priority.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, moving on to the zoning priority ratings. Oh, and I guess one more comment, just to be clear. There are also C and D categories. We didn't include everything on here today, but we do have these are just the changes that we're planning to make, and we'll present these in full to you at another work session. So moving on to the zoning priority ratings, our initial thoughts on this were to shift some things up into type A, other things into type B, and make some changes to type B. So type A for zoning currently includes imminent dangers, and dangers, but not imminent. So it's really any unsafe situation from a land use code perspective. And I see that IE there is missing examples, but we do include examples within our priority ratings document. What we're planning to add to type A are illegal businesses under specific situations. So as you can see, illegal businesses that are not allowed in their zone district. That means there's not likely a realistic path forward. There There are cases where we might support a rezoning that would allow for a business to occur, for example, within a GMA area or in an area where we're trying to incentivize a rezone. So that wouldn't be what we're talking about here. These are the illegal businesses that are not allowed in the zone district, as well as anything that's been denied by the Board of County Commissioners, because that would clearly be a priority. If the county has said, no, you cannot operate, and they continue to operate, we would consider that a high priority. Type B, it's currently framed as proactive or complaint-based. So we can make the determination to proactively act or wait for a complaint. We would propose changing that to complaint-based only. And this is really to mitigate the workload that is generated by some of these violations. And so what we have moved into type B here, or highlighted, are outdoor storage of junk and debris that's having a significant negative impact on surrounding properties. And you'll see when I move to type C that we've separated this out. So there are some outdoor storage of junk and debris, the rubbish ordinance. There are some of those that would fall into type B and others that would be type C. It's those ones that are having a significant negative impact on surrounding properties that would be a type B. Expansions of non-conforming businesses would be a type B. Violations of any conditions of approval, type B. Illegal businesses that might have a path forward within their zone district, we would treat as a type B. And violations that might hold up the issuance of building permits, so setback variances or accessory living areas that were unpermitted, things that really require planning approval before a building permit could be issued. Those would be prioritized. And then finally, occupied RVs on private property. And we want to make a distinction between occupied RVs and ones that are just being stored on a property. If you're storing an RV or multiple RVs, it would fall into that outdoor storage of junk and debris category. So that's when we would decide, is it having an impact on neighboring properties or not? If it's just one RV that's being stored that's not having much of an impact, we would probably treat that differently than somebody storing 20 RVs on their property for all their friends and family. But those occupied RVs, that's where there's a potential life safety issue of somebody living long-term in an RV. That's something that would be a higher priority. So moving into type C, and the blue shows some of the changes in wording. The green shows things that have been moved here. So what we propose to move out of type B and into type C are sign code violations and graffiti violations. Currently, those are lumped into type B. Those tend to not have as significant an impact, and we don't have much capacity to get to those items, and have really considered some of the business and more impactful junk and debris cases to be a higher priority. So again, here in type C is where we would put outdoor storage of junk and debris that's only visible to the complainant and has a moderate to low negative impact on surrounding properties. So trying to create a distinction there. So I'll pause there to see if there's feedback on the zoning priority ratings, type A, B, and C, and some of the changes that we're proposing.
Commissioner Stevens.
Yeah, I just had a question on the outdoor storage of junk and debris. Are there ever concerns that might move to a type A where there's, I think about a hoarding I think there was a fire once with a hoarding situation that was in District 2. And I think, I don't know where we determine that it rises to a level that it becomes a life safety, but how would folks determine that?
Yeah, there is a threshold at which it would pass into that either imminent dangers or non-imminent dangers category where there really is kind of a safety risk or threat. I don't know, Tony, if you might want to come up and just share briefly how you make that determination in that type of situation where something is an imminent danger or not.
So if you would identify yourself, please.
Sure.
Mr. Tony, thank you.
Yep. Tony Brooks with Larimer County Code Compliance. So we don't get a lot of those where, we have, usually it's the outdoors storage of that kind of stuff, which gets our attention. We haven't had not in my side of the county, which is the southeast part, but there's been occasions up in Chad's area where I think the house was, there was so much weight in the house that it was a danger, and I think the kids stepped in and helped clean it out, but it's nothing where the county got involved, so I think the.
What about
family took care of it.
outdoor, kind of like where it blocked egress or something like, or, we've had a lot of these cases where, there's not just one RV, there's 10 RVs, and it's unclear like who's, and some people might be living in some, that makes that threshold or something?
Yeah, we when it's the front porch is blocked and there's lots of stuff. There's one, Chad just had one over on Overland Trail in Mulberry where the entire house was just inhabitable. But yeah, I don't know what happened with that case, but we do get lots of people living in RVs and they don't have an approved method of managing their human waste. So that usually goes in the ditch or in a culvert pipe or something, and then we want the neighbors to let us know so we can get that addressed.
Yeah, it's not that we're not keeping an eye out, but we can't keep an eye out on every single situation. So we are relying on the neighbors to report kind of a situation that feels dangerous or unhealthy for.
You're right.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
And then when any inspectors are out, not, including our code compliance inspectors, but also any other staff in our department, building inspectors, for example, who may be out in the field, if they notice something that seems questionable, we will absolutely investigate that.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Regarding the, what you've just shared, Rebecca, the land use related code compliance priority ratings, how would we apply these if the illegal business is a home occupation or perhaps a cottage industry where the commercial or business activity is happening inside?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to, is there a path forward or not? For those home occupations and rural occupations, those are allowed within certain circumstances up to certain limits in terms of how much activity can be happening outside the house versus inside the house, number of employees, things like that. So we would be looking at, is it possible for this business to continue operating at a level that does comply with our home occupation or rural occupation regulations? If there's some kind of home occupation or business happening on a property that's really outside the bounds of a home occupation, an example is poultry slaughtering. That we've had that come up where that's happening on someone's driveway or in their backyard. There's some real health hazards related to that, a real nuisance. They're operating it as a home occupation, but it really doesn't fit within our criteria for that, and there's not a path forward for them to get that approved on their property. Sorry, I chose the most graphic example.
Well, actually, we have seen that.
Yes.
Like, wait a minute, this is okay? This is weird. So, okay.
No, it's not allowed. Okay, any other questions on the priority ratings before I move on to other action items? Okay, and I'm happy to revisit after the presentation. Okay, so the next item I'm going to move on to is building code and other violations that are identified during a planning process. So these are the projects that are moving through a development review process, and through that process we discover one or more violations. Perhaps there was a shed that was built without a permit, or a deck, or some other situation that has we discover an accessory living area that wasn't approved. We heard support from the commissioners in certain situations for postponing the planning approval until those related code violations have either been resolved or in the process of being resolved. And I want to emphasize the word related there. There are certainly situations where we discover a violation that's very much unrelated to the planning approval. Let's say they're trying to get a new accessory living area approved. And we discovered through that process that, on the other side of the property, there was a shed that was built without a permit. We wouldn't necessarily look to hold up the planning approval for that accessory living area to make them get a permit for that shed first. We would still have a condition, or we would still inform them that they need to get a permit for that shed, but we wouldn't hold up the approval of the unrelated kind of project for that. So that's a distinction that we've been working with our attorney, with the county attorney's office on, to make sure we are kind of within the correct legal bounds of what we can tie an approval to or not. But we did hear support for when it's reasonable and when it's tied to that planning application, making sure any violations are addressed or in the process of being addressed before that's approved. There are no funding implications for this item, and we will plan to move forward with looking at this on a case-by-case basis. And this would be an important partnership between code compliance and planning to make sure that those two divisions are working together well on this item. Next is the fee structure for as-built permits. This is another item that we felt like we heard consensus from the commissioners on, and that was to impose an additional fee on as-built permits, so permits for work that was done without a permit previously, in those situations where the current homeowner is the one who did the work. So, again, making a distinction here between somebody who purchased a property that had violations that may not have been disclosed to them. They may not have been aware of what was permitted or unpermitted at the time they purchased the property. We're not trying to penalize those property owners with an additional permit. But for those properties where the owner is the current owner is the one who did that unpermitted work, when we do route them into the process to get a permit, we would charge an additional fee to recover the costs of our code compliance staff time for helping bring those buildings into compliance. This is an item that would generate some additional revenue. We don't anticipate that it's a huge amount of revenue, and I'll mention that when I talk about the fee amount itself. But this is something that would help us recover some of the staff time that's spent on these buildings that get built without permits. This would not be applicable on many of our miscellaneous permits, only additions, alterations, and new structures. And it would take us about 3 months to implement this fee just within our systems and working with our IT department. So additional information on this, we've looked at what fee amount might be reasonable, and we want to set that fee at a level that encourages compliance. So if we set that fee too high, people may avoid coming in and working through the process with us. So we don't want to be, we don't necessarily want to set the fee at what full cost recovery would look like for us. We want to set a little lower there to incentivize compliance. And on average, we estimate that these as-built permits require about 2 to 4 hours of staff time of code compliance inspectors' time to get them into the process and educate them on the requirements. So based on this, we recommend a fee of $100 that would be an administrative fee added on top of the building permit. And based on historical volumes, we anticipate that this could generate in the $15,000 to $20,000 range annually for code compliance. All right, next is the building violation recording process. So this is what we talked about previously, is the process to when issues are identified, building code violations on a property, recording information about those violations to the property. So, recording with the clerk and recorder's office information so that someone would discover that information through a title search. This is really something that we see as a service to future property buyers, as a way to improve the disclosure and put people on notice when there are violations associated with a property. We have a process that has already been developed for this, and it's just been sitting and waiting for the resources to implement it. because it would require either an increase in staffing or a reallocation of how we're spending staff time now. So our next steps are to continue to explore options for resourcing this, or continue to place this process on hold if we're unable to properly resource it. And recognizing that the county budget is still uncertain for the coming years, we recognize that this is one that will take some time to really understand what the options are. So we put a 6 to 12 month time frame on that one. The last item that I'll highlight is, and again, these are ordered in kind of in terms of implementation timeline or how soon we could get to some of these things. So the last one is one where we heard a little more caution and concern from the commissioners, but overall some general understanding of the issues and support for including additional tools for regulating home and rural occupation businesses. So currently the issue is when we have home and rural occupations, we don't have a mechanism to require them to fill out a form that identifies what they are doing as part of their home occupation and rural occupation. What we would intend to do instead is to require, when a complaint is filed on a home occupation or rural occupation, in those situations require a form to be filled out that documents what is happening on site so that we can hold that business accountable in the future if they violate the terms of their home occupation or the limits that have been set. We already have that form in place. We just don't use it in a proactive way right now. So this would be taking a more proactive approach to requiring registration for these types of businesses. This would require a land use code change and some updates to the existing forms. And so it would take about 6 to 9 months to work through a process for that, but would not necessarily have any funding or staffing implications. It would just be an additional requirement that we put on these home and rural occupation businesses that have received a complaint. So I'll finish with my conclusion slides and then welcome additional questions and discussion. So this has been an iterative process working with you all to receive guidance on these items, and we really appreciate the input that we've received from you all, as well as the many different staff and different divisions and departments who have provided input, including our county attorney's office, who've been very helpful partners. We will continue to follow up on these implementation items as we take action or as we need additional guidance and decision making. And the co-compliance staff are really excited to continue to improve the way that we deliver this particular service to the community and are really energized by the results and the findings of the assessment and what might be possible moving forward. This last slide, I feel bad that Amy can't represent it herself because I think it's really powerful message. She recently attended a training on co-compliance best practices nationally and took some of this information that's on this slide from the presentation. Her first takeaway is that we are doing just about everything that's mentioned as a national best practice and want to continue to recognize our co-compliance team for how leading edge they are in the state and really in the nation. But some of the points from that training were that the best approach to co-compliance involves taking the time to educate and work with people, making an effort to help people through the process, really always coming back to why and explaining why we have regulations and why they matter to our community. Offer the how to get through the process, expect some rejection and expect to have to work with some people a little bit, have a more involved relationship in some cases. When there are different paths forward or options or alternatives, explain those alternatives, accept refusals, and then, of course, celebrate our successes, of which we have many within our co-compliance division. So thank you, and happy to answer whatever questions or continue this dialogue.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you, Amy and team, for the tremendous work. I know you all have been working on this for a while, and I think it goes to say we already were kind of exemplars in the area, and to further look for innovation and refinement and to even go above and beyond is tremendous. I want to say I really appreciate it and thank you very much. I don't think I have any questions at this time, colleagues. Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, I don't have any questions. I just want to thank you. I think this was a good process, and I think it was, I did have to wrestle with some of these issues, and, my whole goal is helping you do your job better and helping code compliance officers do their job better and more efficiently. So, I want to support that end because I know it's often difficult work. And, it's never easy telling somebody they did something wrong and they got to fix it, right? I mean, that's, and yet we, have people, and Tony's here, and, go out in the field every day and do that, right? And so, to me, I wanted to make sure that whatever we recommended was supportive to that end of, like, I don't want to make your lives more difficult. I want to make it easier for you to do your jobs. And so, and I appreciate it because I will say, while we do get a fair number of complaints, we usually don't get complaints from the people who are being complained against as much as we get complaints from the people who are concerned, right? And so I think that speaks to the fact that you do all those things that are listed up there. So, yeah, I'm supportive of the changes you're suggesting. I guess with the things that require some maybe additional funding, like you said, we're in a holding pattern even more than we thought we were because of this new special session at the end of the week on budget. But certainly this seems like a good step forward, and if it works for you, it works for me. I guess that's what I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kafalis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rebecca. I, too, am supportive of where we are in this process and moving forward. I think what you've just shared with us is an accurate reflection of our previous discussions. One of the things that I want to make sure doesn't get lost in all of this, and I think you've captured it regarding fair, firm, and consistent, but on the matter of illegal businesses, I think what we talked about last time was being very cautious about shutting down businesses unless indeed, there are life safety or environmental issues. And I just want to remind us of that. I know that's not what we want to do. If we have to, I guess that's what we do. But just wanted to express that. And I think you've captured it, and I think that's part of our philosophy of how we do this code compliance, both on the land use side and on the building side. And finally related, it would be interesting to know what is the extent of the problem. I don't know if we have that kind of information. How many illegal businesses do we think are operating out of there? I'm seeing some facial expressions from one of our code compliance persons. So apparently, it is an issue, and we can leave it at that, Rebecca. It's okay.
Yeah, and we can think about the best way to assess the extent of that problem because there are probably a lot out there that we're not aware of until we receive a complaint.
I think this is
Yeah.
good, and it captures what we've discussed, and thank you for everyone's work.
Thank you.
So and I don't know if I specifically expressed my support, and I do think that it's a sticky situation with legal businesses, but we have to also think of the equity of all the folks that are doing it correctly and that have been operating correctly and within the rules and just trying to help them get into compliance. But there's also some that are in some areas that probably should not be operating. So it's not that we're always pro-business, but there's certain procedures, and I know a lot of businesses are working really hard and following the rules, and just want to make sure it's fair to all those who are doing it correctly. So I think overall this is great, and as we find more out from the state legislature and other things, we'll know more about budget implications. So thank you. Appreciate everyone's work. Belinda, you didn't have anything you wanted to add?
I guess I want to say, like anything else, these presentations are 45-minute presentations, but a lot of work goes into this and a lot of consideration. You all walk a tightrope every day out in the community. It's not always fun, but it is always appreciated. by us here in this building. So thank you for the time. I hope Amy is watching and sees her good work go someplace today. I think that's really helpful. It feels like there's really just one outstanding question related to funding, and we'll continue to follow up on that.
Okay, Rebecca, we have a Community Development Director update from you.
Yes, thank you. Let me get my notes for that. I have just a few updates for you today. First, we have our land use hearings this afternoon and this evening, a 3 o'clock hearing and a 6:30 hearing. You have received some additional information from staff on several of the items. I included a packet for you over there that's information on one of the items, and more presentations and other packets will be shared by the other planners for the other items. But we have a full set of agendas today and anticipate a robust dialogue on all of them. We are planning dinner in between the 3 o'clock and the 6:30 hearing, wherever it makes sense to take a break for that. So we will have food available. Next, or are there any questions on the
Commissioner
hearing?
Gonzalez, I see your hand is raised, sir.
Thank you. One of the comments, I think we've received a slurry of comments today, but I think one we received yesterday or last night was regarding one of the consent agenda items. Therefore, I presume that one, there's a likelihood that it will get pulled off the consent agenda. Is that correct?
We're not anticipating that that one will be pulled at this time. The commenter who sent comments in is not planning to attend the hearing. You may choose to pull that item for discussion, any of you. As staff, we are not planning to move that item to discussion because we feel that the applicant's response to those comments addressed the concerns. But that we would look to you to determine whether any of you would like to pull that.
Great. Thank you for clarifying. I have just one more question regarding, the general question regarding process. And I noticed that the short-term rental applications that are Estes Valley related go through the Estes Valley Planning Advisory Committee. And so my question is, why doesn't that same process apply to the Red Feather Lakes Planning Advisory Committee? Since one of the short-term rentals applications is Red Feather Lakes, why wouldn't we have presented it to them to get their recommendations?
Yeah, let me take a look at that before the hearing and check with the planner. Because anything within the Red Feather Lakes plan boundary should be going to the Red Feather Lakes Committee for a recommendation. So let me double check the address, the location, and talk to the planner and see if that was applicable to this project or not, and we can follow up at the
I
hearing on
appreciate that. It
Yeah,
may be
appreciate
that this
that.
particular location is outside the PAC boundaries, so that might be the explanation. Thank you, and I guess just food for thought. I'm still trying to understand the first criterion in 6.4.3D. From a planning perspective, what exactly does it mean that there are minimal impacts on existing and future development? I've always struggled with that particular criterion, but I have a feeling we don't have time to get into it right now.
Yeah, that is a subjective criteria, so we can, this afternoon, our staff or our planning manager could weigh in on how we interpret that as staff.
Would that be an appropriate question? You're all okay with that?
Yes, I think that's an appropriate question to be asking during whatever item you feel it's, applicable, or the first discussion item, if you'd like. And we can provide our perspective as staff on it. But ultimately, you all are the decision makers and can interpret it differently from us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Commissioner. Any other updates?
Yes, I've been keeping you updated on this over the last week, but just want to let you know we are expecting the Thornton Pipeline 1041 permit submittal on Wednesday of this week. So we are told that's when it will be received, and we'll let you know once it does come in, if it does come in this week. And again, we're working on some web page with FAQs and information on what the 1041 permit process is, how it works, where public engagement how the public can provide comments and be engaged in the process. And we will share that with you once we've got that posted online. And if you have if you're receiving any additional questions or you have questions you feel we should be answering on that website, we would welcome your thoughts.
Commissioner Kafales.
Thank you kindly, Madam Chair. And just as a reminder, Rebecca, once your office officially receives the 1041 application, does that trigger the ex parte communication requirement?
Yes, that is correct. So once we've received an application, and it's actively in review. Yeah, and I don't know if Frank would like to come up and add anything to that.
Hey, Rebecca, thanks.
It would, although we know it's coming, so my take would be you really already ought to be trying to abide by that. Because we know it's going to be coming in.
Great, thank you.
All right, and my last update, and I would welcome, Leslie's assistance with this one if there's more to be said here, but we are receiving requests from multiple boards and commissions, really our planning advisory committees and other community groups for specialized long-range planning in those areas. So we've heard from the LaPorte Planning Advisory Committee, the Red Feather Planning Advisory Committee, a group in Livermore, and we've heard interest from Tahosa Valley as well for long-range planning. And I know we are still in an uncertain situation for the budget for next year and not sure what funding might be available for long-range planning, but we're receiving requests right now to help those groups start to identify what their interests are and their needs or vision for those areas, and wanted to just put that out there to you all and see if there's any direction that you have as far as participating in those staff participating in those conversations when we haven't yet set any priorities or set items into our work plan for next year. Leslie, is there anything that you would like to add?
Covered it well, Rebecca. I think we would probably recommend that we not participate until we have more certainty around the funding and what we do next, just because I think that may set up some, may misalign the expectations. So what we would probably propose to do is see what happens with the budget, come back and have some conversation with the board about the priorities, so that then Rebecca and her team can prioritize which projects to start to move forward with, where we have funding that can support those efforts. So that may be a little bit more of a proactive statement as opposed to a question, but I think otherwise the way you framed it is really good. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Commissioner Stevens.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I agree that we shouldn't kind of jump the gun on these, knowing that we don't know what funding looks like. We might have other priorities that when we, talk to you and think about priorities for next year of, what. At the same time, I think it's good to kind of acknowledge these folks that are wanting to do this planning. Are there any DOLA grants that are available or any other sources of funding for something like this?
I'm aware of 2 DOLA grants that relate to long-range planning that are out there right now. One is the Strong Communities grant that we applied for, which was really focused on intergovernmental cooperation and affordable housing type projects. And then the other is directly tied to Proposition 123 and helping to streamline processes for affordable housing specifically. So a lot of what I'm seeing from DOLA on the planning side, I know there's more on the infrastructure side as well, but a lot of what I'm seeing on the planning side is really housing driven right now.
So maybe not. And I do think that we should probably try to create a priority list of who, with these, smaller communities of, who needs the help the soonest, who's, kind of really struggling the most. Have we ever done any of these? I don't maybe think so. And so, so clearly I was going to say if they haven't been done in 10 or 15 years or 20 years or something like that. But if they've never been done, then But create some kind of criteria for deciding which ones we kind of tackle first. I think really empowering the community to take some of this on themselves, the work that they can do, and then maybe stepping in, it's not that they can have meetings, and start to talk about what they want for their community. That's always allowed, and maybe see who kind of can get organized quick. I don't know. I'm just trying to think, like, if we do embark on this, we're not going to be able to do 6 or 7 communities in 1 year. And so we really have to have a plan for the plans. And so I just want us to, kind of start thinking about this, of how we message that to the communities, because we don't want to discourage any of that. And yet, if there's a financial piece and it requires a lot of staff time, let's be realistic about what we can get done when. And, communities that are struggling with something in particular right away, maybe prioritize those over communities that are maybe smaller and just need maybe some guidance and not necessarily a full plan. I don't know. Because, maybe not everybody needs a plan, depending on the geographic area we're talking about. Maybe they just need, some guiding documents that will kind of help them as they grow. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Commissioner Kafales.
A couple of thoughts that I would add in response to your question. One is, I wonder what the status is of the Community Development Department finalizing its work plan for 2024. I think that would be helpful. Secondly, as we've discussed, Rebecca, regarding Red Feather Lakes PAC and LaPorte PAC, there's a process that we've begun within those meetings, and I think we should continue that process, but to do it in an effective way. We seem like we go back to the starting place with regard to what needs to happen, for people to read those sub-area plans, which are generally, for the most part, they're probably okay, the vision and everything else, but remember how we've talked about being more targeted or strategic. So I think that process should move forward. And I think there'll be a bit of a pause over the holidays rather than additional meetings. And the final, and I think that's important based on our related conversation about, some of the PACs not wondering what their purpose is. So I just don't want to lose sight of that. And my final point is that maybe we need to remind folks, the difference between potentially updating a sub-area plan and what is in our framework, our character area plans, because I think, regarding the Livermore and their request to, attend a variety of meetings, it may make sense for them to have their meetings, but to remind them, here's a character area plan that might be more appropriate for what Livermore is thinking about.
If I could I can respond about the status of our work plan for next year, and appreciate that feedback. We are waiting on a couple key inputs before we can really finalize that. One is the budget and understanding kind of what there's funding for next year, and the other is the Strong Communities grant that we applied for, that would fund some work on intergovernmental agreements. For example, the IGA for Wellington and their growth management area, and some of those other priorities. So we're waiting on really kind of funding information for a couple projects before we could really solidify what our work plan might look like, so we could then propose it for input from you all.
And what I shared about the PACs and the character area plan, that makes sense, right? Where I'm going with that.
Yes, thank you.
I think we don't want to discourage people from trying to plan ahead or have community building opportunities. But I think you're right. We have to wait and see what happens with the budget. Other consideration is like Tahosa Valley. It's hard for them to gather in the winter. And so it might be, if they're still wanting to continue to do that, it would be a good time to gather and have those conversations in the spring. And I know a lot of those businesses on the north end of the valley are probably interested in preserving their character, but also we start to have some changes in folks growing and building in that area, and then they complain about things. And so It's something that maybe, I think it's good to be proactive with, especially with the fire danger and some of the things. So I think they're starting to think about it more. And I know there's a water issue with some of those wells, but I think that's a Colorado State Department of Health and Environment issue, not with us. So I'm curious about that too. There's some overlaying projects, as we found out with the one big water project that we thought was connected, and all those, seems to be some overlaying things happening in that valley. So just curious about that as well. Unless we know something about maybe that's our health department working on those wells and septic tanks. So
I am not familiar with that project.
I just had some residents saying that their water was not good. So I need to follow up on that and have them contact appropriate folks. So
Yes, yeah, it sounds like something that our health department would want to weigh in on, but that's, to Commissioner Stevens' point about coming up with some criteria for prioritization where there's kind of an issue that might require additional investment or policy to help resolve that might increase the urgency of working on plans in certain areas as resources allow.
okay, thank you. Any other updates?
That is it from me, so thank you.
Okay, so at 2:31, we are adjourned and we'll get ready for our land use hearing. Thank you.